I think it was, let's understand this generation. Like, let's come up from a place of understanding, and therefore we can maybe help with it. It's easy for, I think, it is a generation gap on this one because it's such a big difference. And the students we have in class today at the high school level were born with that smartphone, and we're seeing those repercussions right now. And it is a generational thing, because I look and I think, well, I feel so very different in how I communicate from you, more so than I did from others. So I want to come from a place of understanding this.
Hi, it's Morgane Michael, and this is Hindsight 101, where you're going to get practical strategies for designing a life that inspires you, one life edit at a time. Hello, and welcome to Hindsight 101 with me, your host, Morgane Michael, and I'm here with Lisa Green, and she is the author of Outsmarted. She's a passionate teacher, an author, and an educational consultant, and her work really focuses on smartphones, advancing technology, and really helping educators to carve out a new path with this new technology and the way that we are now communicating with each other. So welcome, Lisa. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Morgane, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. So just briefly tell the audience just a little bit. Most of us are educators or parents, sometimes in the public sector, but tell us a little bit about what brought you to this work, what kind of made you feel like you were interested, and then finally got you to writing Outsmarted.
Yeah, I during the pandemic, I decided to go back and do my master's, because why not? And I focused my master's on, I was looking for like an organizational psychology style of master's. It's just an area that's really piqued my interest a lot. That wasn't there when I was a student kind of growing up. And now that it's there, I'm like, oh, this is something I think I'd really like. So my master's really focused on work, organization, and leadership. And I kind of tied that in with education, looking at it from an educational lens, which I think that the world of organizational psychology, which really looks at workplace dynamics and the psychology of the workplace, has not really paired that much with education. But as a teacher, we see it all the time. And we're raising these students to go into the workforce. So I think it's a natural pairing. So that's what my master's work focused on. And then of course I look at the psychology of what's going on, because that's my area now, just looking at everything. And the thing that we're seeing rise around us, I think how students are different is what's causing the difference in students. It's smartphone use. This is a generation that's growing up with smartphones. We're seeing this again, this panic arise around this, whether some agree it's a moral panic or not. It's just, the next generation dealing with what's come next. And as a teacher, I look at it and say, well, okay, I am seeing a lot of issues in the classroom right now. I do see a difference in students and how they focus, and how they get their work done, and their ability to get their work done. And it's a major difference in students, I would say, from even 5-10 years ago. And so what has been the change? Well, it's the phone in their hands, and it's the screens. That's been the change in how they think. And so now I think about it as that side of it. Well, here's the difference. I'm an educator. How can I help them? Like, how they're going to go out into the workforce. How can we help them deal with this? So I think all of this kind of came around at the same time of me doing this work, and then, getting excited by doing this work and looking at my students, thinking, as that teacher, how can I help my students better prepare themselves to be adults and going into the working world and going on to study? So it was a long answer to tell you that's how it all came about. And no one was really doing the work. Everyone's kind of giving teachers lots of ideas for how best can you use AI in the classroom, and, and use the phones for Kahoots and all these things. But I haven't yet seen, teachers are we're drowning a little bit, and I haven't seen a lot of answers as to the help around this yet. So I don't think I have all the answers by any means, but I'm hoping that I start a conversation that we can keep going, because I think teachers really need to have this conversation.
I think that's a great point, Lisa. And I think at the end of the day, you're right. People are sort of throwing strategies out there, but what we need is a deeper, more theoretical conversation around what is the purpose of tech in schools? What are we hoping to achieve? What are we trying to teach kids? What is the overall overarching goal that we're aiming for? Because it's fine to use tech as a tool, but then if you're not really using it for that deeper thinking, then it's really no different than anything shiny and new, right? It's like a new kind of smart board, or it's a new, whiteboard, or whatever it is. So getting kind of to that deeper purpose is important for sure.
Mhm.
You've mentioned some of the differences that we've seen for anyone who's maybe not in education. Like, I've been in this game now for like 17, 18 years. And I have also seen this change. What would you identify are some of the major shifts that you've seen, either anecdotally yourself, or that is in the literature that sort of backs up that claim or that assertion?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of reading around this as well, but I'll just say what I've seen as a teacher with my students, which is, uh, and there's definitely an inability to focus or focus for long periods of time. So that distraction mind is there. Memory, I've seen students, their memorization is being impacted in a really big way, their study habits. I think even if they have positive study habits, their memory just isn't quite the same. They're not working it in the same way. So I think memory is not quite the same way. And that's a lot to do with the phones, but also education getting away from, wanting students to know facts, which I think we need to look at it in a different way. And I really have seen a drop in students just handing their work in on time and organization. Like, their organizational skills are horrible for the most part, right? Like, I just don't see the same type of organizational skills that I used to see. And I don't know if it's because people think the phones are doing that for us now. So, you have your phone, you're putting the dates in, you should have this, but that's not happening. So I think I'm seeing this, and the socialization. I
Mhm.
mean, that is the biggest thing I think a lot of teachers will say. And I know the ban in schools has happened. And I just think I've said this before. I think bans are band-aid solutions to this, because the students immediately get their phone back at lunchtime. They're out doing things. They walk out the door and they're on their phones. They're not talking to one another nearly as much, but they're socializing differently. And that's,
Mhm.
again, where I understand the moral panic of our generation looking at this, saying, you guys aren't talking to one another. And then I know that their socialization has just changed, and we need to
Mhm.
kind of think about that. And I worry, like, well, just put you on your phone, look at one another, talk to one another. You don't know how to have a proper conversation, which is something I'm also seeing a lot of less eye contact with my
Yes.
students,
Yes.
and a less of a skill to. And I see this also when I go, I'm trying to buy something in a store, and I'm dealing with a younger generation, will say, who I feel like you're not really sure how to um, talk with me or deal with certain problems. And I don't know if that's where that's failed. I think it's a lot to do with the phone. So these are all the things that I'm seeing within this generation. And I ask myself, am I just that grandparent that my grandparents worried, right? Or my mom worried about things? And is it just that? But I think there's more to it than that, because they weren't really worried about my socialization skills. I'm worried about the socialization skills of the students today.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that it has accelerated at, at quite a pace that it is alarming. And it's interesting because you're right about that. It's almost like a hospitality piece. Many of that younger, like many students or individuals of that younger generation, have a very difficult time kind of switching into hospitality mode. Like, that's not even a mode that we know or want to achieve right now. There's sort of a leaning into authenticity as well, which is away from that professionalism. And when you think about, okay, so what is the purpose of school, or what is the purpose of our overall existence, if you want to get super, like, you zoom out, at some point, we do need to learn to interact with other people, whether we know them or not, or whether we particularly like them, because most of us will be selling some kind of a service or a product to them, to the greater population, whether that is at the grocery store. And you do have to have some air of general hospitality, or put a smile on your face, or make some attempt at eye contact, because it does signal sort of, this is what I wrote about in my book. These are belonging cues. And as human beings, we seek this in each other. And if we can't kind of achieve that reciprocal back and forth, it's hard to trust, and it's hard to build a sense of community. And if we don't have a sense of community, it can be really, really tricky to feel like we belong on a broader scale, and then enter anxious feelings and depression and all of these more complex sort of wellness conditions that can result from that. So, some of the things that, I have somebody in my life who has worked with his son on this, and he's in middle school and now in high school, or during middle school. And and he would have these challenges, and some people call them like comfort challenges or discomfort challenges, but essentially he'd say, I want you to talk to 5 people today that you've never talked to, and I want it to be the goal is kind, you're curious, you're finding out a little bit about them, don't make it weird, but make some eye contact and seem interested in them. And reflecting on that time, this particular student says it was probably one of the best things that he ever had to do. And his dad was like, really? He's like, yeah, because so many, and he's recognizing this as a 15-year-old. He's like, so many of my peers have huge anxiety around talking to adults or going and knocking on doors for a bottle drive or answering the phone, like basic things that used to be like a rite of passage for most people, right? Now we're not learning these skills. And unless we're taught explicitly, we could go out into the workforce, which arguably is part of our job as educators, is to prepare our students for life after school. And that's work, right? How do we do that in such a way that they're competitive out there, right? It's not the only purpose, of course, but it's a big part. And so I think this is a really important conversation to be having. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think you brought up so many important things, especially like that grander scale of connecting with one another, and yeah, that kindness piece is so big because it's a grander scale. And then on that smaller relationship scale with friends, and when they do enter into actual relationships with partners, I worry a little bit about how they talk to one another. I've seen breakups happen over texting and miscommunication via texting. And, you talk to students today and it's like, who would you prefer to text or prefer to talk? Oh, it's 100% they prefer to text over talk, which is, we know talking is how you said it, how you get vulnerable with one another, how you understand one another, empathy, building empathy, which is another thing I'm seeing a lack of in my students, which is quite scary. And yeah, whose responsibility is this? Is it the responsibility of parents at home, the education system, or how about all of us? Because we're all adults raising children in society to become adults, right? So I think education system has a lot of responsibility that it needs to take on for this to adjust, because we're seeing things we need to maybe help out. Yes, of course, parents, but it's difficult for parents because, again, when your kids don't know how to talk to you or they're going to their phones for answers, which again, kids used to go to parents for answers, right? They used to go to teachers for answers, and now they go to their phones or computers for answers more so. So even that piece is way different. It's just, it's so big when you really break it down into why these things are kind of happening.
It is so true. And I think about this empathy piece too, being a huge thing. We hear about keyboard cowboys, or whatever, just sort of spewing absolute garbage out into the social media sphere, because there's a sense of like you can dehumanize people quite easily and quite quickly without even realizing. But as soon as you villainize somebody and essentially dehumanize them, we as human beings have this capacity for cruelty. And so a lot of the bullying that comes up or any of that stuff, I think we have to be so aware and be able to teach students explicitly. And I'm sure at the high school level, that's something that's happening more readily than say in kindergarten, where this actually isn't a direct impact to the classroom. But we do see, obviously we see the effects of competing with, really engaging shows at home versus I'm up here just telling you a story, and it may or may not be as entertaining as it would have been in the past, right? So,
yes, absolutely.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what is it that you, when you wrote the book, what was your core message? Like, what is it that you want people to either learn or change their mind about, or what is it that you want to confirm for people?
I think it was, let's understand this generation. Like, let's come up from a place of understanding, and therefore we can maybe help with it. It's easy for, I think, it is a generation gap on this one because it's such a big difference. And the students we have in class today at the high school level were born with that smartphone, and we're seeing those repercussions right now. And it is a generational thing, because I look and I think, well, I feel so very different in how I communicate from you, more so than I did from others. So I want to come from a place of understanding this, not from a place of like, you're different and why don't you do the things that I think you should be doing, which I think a lot kind of come at that right now. The books like Jonathan Haidt's Anxiety Generation raise excellent points, because they're very factual, right? It's providing a lot of research-based things about this is why depression is on the rise, and these are all the things we're seeing with our teens. But again, that understanding of why, like the social media piece for them, when I think about, I try to understand it from this perspective. I didn't grow up having to represent myself online and in person.
Mm.
And a teenager who's growing up learning who they are, like it's identity formation at this age. We know how difficult that is.
Absolutely.
This is that time when you decide who you are becoming. And now you're deciding, a generation is deciding who they are in one place and another, online
Right.
and in person. And it's and is your online self your authentic self? Is your in-person self your authentic self? We know our online selves. Like I know I put on my best stuff. This is me on vacation. This is
The
what that is
highlight.
not, yeah, it's not my authentic self at all. But teenagers, they're snapping, they're sending pictures out. This is their life. They really are living a dual life that I don't comprehend. I think like I don't, it's easier for an adult to be, well, I'm glad that I didn't grow up with this.
Yeah.
Okay, but you are growing up with this. So what is that doing to you?
Right.
And as an educator, I think we have to look at that. So that's where I wrote this book, from that side of things. Let's understand them, and then we can try to help them. And
Wow.
again, I don't have all the answers for this, but I am trying to come at it from an empathetic place.
Yeah.
And having that conversation with teens, tell me, what is this like for you? And I don't think they have the words for it because it's what they've grown up with. So I don't even think they understand it yet. Anyway, that was a lot on there, but did that answer the question? Like
I think so.
Why I wrote this in the first place. And it has a lot, like the book has a lot about, let's understand what teens are growing up with. Let's understand maybe the ramifications that's having on them. And then let's also understand how in the classroom, how we can best kind of facilitate or do a few things that might change to help us educate. There's a lot with assessment in here as well. Like I look at it from a teacher's perspective. I think parents can get a lot out of a book like this as well, just for that understanding piece, and maybe have some conversations with their teens that they're not having yet about, geez, what is life like for you with your phone, with the relationships you're forming, how you're consuming media. Like consuming media is so different these days. And one of the things I think that we're also seeing in the classroom, I might go off on a little tangent here, but there's this socially shared experience that all of us did from generations growing up, where we had those water cooler talks because we all watched that finale of the episode on a Monday night at 8 o'clock and met and talked about it on Tuesday. And we were watching the same series, and we were waiting for the same amount of time on things. We were reading the same album covers that came out at the same time and listening to the same music. And now there's some great books out there about this. One is called Filter World, just about how the world is getting very filtered towards us on a cultural thing. But if you look at it from the perspective that the socially shared experience that we were having, we're also not having, so those conversations aren't there. And as a teacher, I find it really difficult sometimes to say something that I know everyone can relate to.
Right.
I used to even be able to go to like Harry Potter used to be one of the ones I could rely on. And now that's, becoming an older thing.
Sure.
And as a teacher, that's so hard because how do we, I say someone famous that I think they should know, Taylor Swift is probably one of the only names I could say.
Right.
And they do. But that, I think we've gotten away in education now too, from even at the high school level, some, teaching Shakespeare.
Sure.
I mentioned this in the book because I think Shakespeare has its pluses and minuses. I come from an English perspective, so of course I love Shakespeare. I grew up with that. But I think Shakespeare might be one of the only socially shared experiences as a world we may still have.
Right.
That we can get morals and values.
Yes.
And, look at those things, because otherwise, how do we relay that to generations below us? So I think that's the other thing I kind of bring up in the book for educators and parents to think about too, is the things we're missing.
I think this is so good. And I think also like the common experience, or not the common sense so much, but that common experience that was foundational for many people, wherever it is that they were based in the world, right? But there's sort of like a cultural basic common culture, except now there really isn't. And that splintering does make it hard to create essentially community. And for the same reason I teach kindergarten, this is the same reason that, for better or for worse, same thing, I'm teaching fairy tales, because you know what? None of them know fairy tales anymore. And the problem is and maybe it doesn't matter. We're doing we're doing Indigenous tales and we're doing all sorts of different things with them. But those classic fairy tales are what so many stories are based on. So many allusions, like literary allusion is directly related to some of those big stories. And I think, the nursery rhymes, like all of these things that are so built in, some of them are a bit weird, right? But I think this is like part of our culture, that it's kind of our duty to be exposing them at least. And we can critique them. I think it's important to do that and go, oh my gosh, good thing we don't teach about stranger danger in the way that they used to in the 1800s, because that was really a bit problematic and a little scary, to be honest. But at least you know about it and you have an awareness. And then satire and all those things can kind of be born of that, right? And that's a huge benefit. But if you don't even have that common understanding, you miss things in pop culture, in movies, or whatever it is, right? So I totally agree. I think that's for so many reasons very, very important. Let's talk a little bit about tech as sort of a catalyst for ownership over learning, because I think it isn't the one and only tool, right? We sort of discussed that piece, but it can be a really important tool. Like, there are some positives to it. So tell me a little bit about your perspective on this and how you think tech in various, forms can be a positive thing.
Yeah, I mean, we can't deny that tech is here. So on the positive side, tech is here. It's only advancing, and we have to use it. I mean, we have to be teaching how to use it properly and how to use it wisely, and the skill sets for it still that come in, like tech, of course, ChatGPT, I'm just going to use it as the example because it is the thing that everyone talks about, but generative AI in general has been the largest shift in the last, it hasn't even been 2 years yet, which is shocking. Right, to see the changes that have happened with that. But when you look at generative AI and how quickly tech is advancing, and it's education, again, education, that capital E education, is very slow to respond to this piece. We're all in that responsive mode of like, well, how it's reactive right now to it, instead of proactive in teaching what we think we need with these skill sets for it. But I personally, as a teacher, look at ChatGPT now, and it's like changed my practice. It makes me a more efficient teacher.
Sure.
I can definitely even be more creative with things, but I have the skill set behind me to know what I'm doing with it.
Yes.
Students don't yet have those skill sets. And so it's the like positive. Tech is great. It's going to be there. It's pushing, but what skill sets do we need to do it and use it properly? Because I really think already we're seeing when people apply for jobs, it'll say like advanced knowledge of generative AI, right? Because that's going to be a skill set probably more so than writing.
Yeah.
But you still have to have that writing skill set to be good at understanding what you're reading. So those pieces. And then, yeah, I mentioned this recently at a presentation. I was just talking about how there's another book called Irresistible that I think is a really great book for understanding tech's influence on the brain and social media and those things as well. And it's kind of just mentioned as well that like the next gigantic movement in tech is going to be the VR goggles, VR and AR, right? Augmented reality and virtual reality. And I'm already seeing, and now it's come in, we're just waiting for the price point, and it's there now. The price point, I mean, Meta just came out that it's going to be the number one thing at Christmas this year. So it's already here. But we have young brains who are going to be going into VR and AR that I'm not sure we fully understand yet. I think, I was in Staples and I saw a stand, and they had this virtual reality human body experience and a virtual reality world geography. And you look at that and you think, amazing. Like as a Spanish teacher, I'm going to be able to maybe tell my students, let's go to Spain. Let's experience what it's like to walk on Las Ramblas in Barcelona. And, that's going to be amazing.
Sure.
However, it's always looking at the other side that we are going, because we also know who's going to take advantage of that tech. And we've got games that will be out there that may be first-person shooter games, and we may have other things that teens are going to get themselves into. And when they do, we don't know fully how this is going to impact the brain or yet. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's here. It's like the tech is advanced farther than we have prepared to kind of say, whoa, what's the result of using this? Or how can we properly approach the use of this? Same thing with generative AI, VR, whatever it's going to be. So yeah, I think we can't deny, as educators, we cannot deny tech. We can't turn our backs to it at all. We have to be constantly doing professional development when it comes to this. It's impacting us as our profession, like not me as a teacher teaching students, but me as a teacher working with my colleagues. It impacts, right? How many, look at us having our conversation the way we are,
Right.
dealing with emails back and forth. Like we take our job home with us now all the time. And all these things we just I don't think we take enough time to step back, and that where you come from, you know, when you think about, again, the kindness podcast and empathy, understanding is taking that step back and saying, how is this actually affecting me on a like emotional level, on a mental level right now? I want to be advanced with tech, but maybe I need to step back and say, it's okay if I'm slow to understanding it and doing it. Because I think teachers are feeling a ton of pressure right now to have the latest and greatest, and feeling like we don't want our students to know more than we do.
Is burnout, overwhelm, and low motivation holding your team back? Well, I help people like you in education, the corporate world, and in healthcare to regain a sense of themselves through simple life edits. All you have to do to transform your team is contact me for your next workshop or keynote.
Sure. It's impossible it's impossible to know everything. We just can't. So tell me, this is going to be a two-parter. So you talked about how important it is to understand this generation. So I think that's my first question. What are some big things that we need to understand about this generation? And then the second piece, really digging into, okay, what are some actionable tips here for either educators or parents or people kind of having to deal with youth, children who have an interest in smartphones and technology? So first, what do we need to understand about kids right now?
Oh, they're just kids. I think that's the first thing. Kids are kids no matter what. And I think that what I mean by that is they're trying to figure out this world right now, just as we all did as teens, but they're figuring it out in a different way. And they're getting their information on the world in a different way. They're relying on the internet and social media to be teachers in a big way. And I think we have to understand that this is a generation growing up in a social networking world, which is, you know, these social networking websites and things that are out there getting them to, they're more socially connected and yet disconnected than ever as a generation for us understanding them. We think that they should be, you know, as advanced with using the tech for better, kind of with organizational skills or with focus stuff, and they're not. So again, I think we just have to understand that they're teens, they're youth, they're teens, they're all trying to understand themselves. And yeah, I know I've kind of gotten off track on my answer, but it's such a simple one, is that they're kids first. They're kids first. And yeah, they are dealing with mental health issues right now. And yes, because I do see it. I know that moral panic side of what Jonathan Haidt brings up is true. I see a lot of more mental health things right now. And because they're not talking to one another or to us, they're going to their phones for the answers. And then they're going down these rabbit holes of, what are good fixes or really bad,
Right.
and feeling that they can't talk to us. So I think we have to look at what we think is missing with this generation as parents and as teachers on that level of collaboration, socialization, empathy. These are things the phone cannot provide, right? Our smartphones are things it cannot provide. So what can we make sure we're fostering that we know, we feel like they're lacking and that are still very important in this world? It's like, look at that generation and see that. And that will lead to kind of the second.
Yeah.
From a practical standpoint, in the classroom, when I see issues with my students with focus, for example, I think, like, how can I help you focus? I mean, that's a huge thing to kind of, as a teacher, I'm like, how can I get you to actually just do your work? Right?
Yes.
And so I was trying a few things. I thought, well, what gets me to focus? And I've read lots of things on how to just be more efficient with myself and my personal time, and tips and tricks on this. And one of them for myself, when I'm writing or when I'm marking, I'll set a timer. And that timer is there for 15, 20 minutes of like undivided focus time. I'm not allowed to do anything else but do what I'm doing for that 20 minutes. So I'm like, well, what if I bring this into the classroom? And so my students, I'm like, okay, we're going to be doing this worksheet. and it's time for you to focus, which I also think we can't get away from not ever doing worksheets because students can't focus. We have to help them focus because they'll have to do this in professions. So I throw up a timer. We're doing this for 15 minutes. The timer's up here. At the end of 15 minutes, no matter how far you got, we're going to have a look. Try and get farther next time, right? And just push their focus with this. And I really have found that the visual timer, one, our brains lock into that visual timer because we think, oh, this is the time I have left. I have to do it. Someone starts chatting or looking at something else and they're like, no, we only got 8 minutes left to keep going. So that helped a lot, just bringing in a timer. And I, again, guide students after that to say, look at how this worked. It was 15 minutes of full focus time, non-distracted. Imagine if you did that for studying tonight, instead of 45 minutes of a little bit of this, I'll go over to this, you're going to get much farther. Just try it. And I've seen a difference in my students, and some have come to me saying like, I'm trying this like focus study method. There's like the 15-minute study strategy. I'm trying these things. They are working. Thank you for those ones. So that's like a small thing. And then I have students who, for example, when you assign a project on a larger scale, some inquiry project or some form of project that they're working on, they'll sit there with their Chromebook and they'll sit there for 15 minutes looking at the screen because they don't know how to start. They're overwhelmed by even where to begin. So I go back to what I use. I was like, well, when I have something big I have to do, I create my list, right? We love our lists and our checklists. So, and the research shows that a checklist, when you check it, you're actually hitting that dopamine center of your brain. It's the same thing that students are getting hit when they are on their social media platforms getting likes. If we as teachers can start tapping in to what social media is doing to their brains for the betterment of their education, I think, it's not about winning. It's not about, it's just about, okay, this is what's going on. So I went around with a Post-it note, and it's got the to-do list on it. And I said, I just want you to, this class, you've got to come up with 3 things that you want to get done for this project. And I'm going to walk around. I'm going to look at your 3 actionable items. At the end of the class, we're going to check off and see how far we got. What a difference it created. It was such a small thing. And you think like, well, aren't teachers always doing this? Well, we kind of got away thinking that students maybe, especially at the high school level, have a skill set that this is there. And so students were like, they loved it. They wrote down their list, from like pick my topic first thing, I'm like, go ahead and create 5 things. It feels really good to check it off. And then at the end of class saying, okay, what did you get through? What do you still need to work on tomorrow? Not only did I see focus in class get much better, but the hand-in rate on assignments increased because they were getting their work done. They knew what they had still left to do, and they wanted to get that to accomplish that last checklist. So I am trying to create a few things that I think for teachers, again, it seems so basic, but when I started doing these things, thinking like, why haven't I been doing this for a while? I haven't needed to do it. I'm needing to do it now. The students need it now. And I'm hopefully giving them some skills that they can use outside of my classroom that will help them at post-secondary or at their jobs or in their life, right?
Yeah.
So those are like some small things that came in. And then I would say the third thing is a major change in my own classroom is gamification. So that play for learning. And that I think at any level, kindergarten to grade 12 to whatever adults, it doesn't really matter. Because we want the flashy fun, we're that's what our brains are geared to, and more so now. I was like, let's try like game day Thursday. In Spanish, it's la juego jueves. Like, we're gonna do game days, and I'm gonna get you to work on some memory activities because I want to build the memory center of your brain because I think it's really important that we do. We're gonna have fun in groups, socializing as well, right? So I'm gonna check some boxes that I feel we really need to be doing. And now the students like it. Like they know, oh, it's game day Thursday, and they want to get into their groups and they want to work together and have fun playing games. And it's just creating a little bit more. So I think if we can look at, again, that's the tapping into that smartphone brain. How can we tap into the smartphone brain in a way that will enhance the learning going on in my classroom and give them some skill sets? So that's something my book approaches as well. I hope those are some tips and tricks.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I love all of this. So I think about the timer, huge. I also use that strategy. And I think, if you are not a teacher and you're listening to this, I think about this as a parent. I will ask, I won't impose a timer in the same way, because I think sometimes that can feel a little aggressive when you're like, you have 20 minutes to do your laundry folding, but sometimes I'll say, hey, what do you think? This seems like quite a daunting task. You kind of did the big sigh. I'm getting the sense this isn't your favorite activity in the world. What do you say we did this for 20 minutes? You know, that Pomodoro technique. And it's the
Yes.
same trick that I do with myself when same thing. I have to sit my butt in a seat and like do some podcast editing, or I've got to do something that I don't always love to do, you know? I will sit down, I will put the timer on, and it is remarkable how effective we can be when we really set our mind to it. And I would say, you know, I identify as somebody who definitely fits the criteria for ADHD type brain. It kind of runs in the family. And this is a really effective thing. We have the capacity, many of us, to hyper focus. And so if you can tap into that capacity and sort of do away with the narrative that it's impossible to focus, just make it so that it's just you're focusing on one task, not multitask switching, because that's what's really problematic, especially for busy creative brains, which I would say I have. And it's a total benefit, but it can be really, really difficult. And then I really liked the idea of lists. I had a drama teacher that I speak about quite a bit in my 8th grade all the way to 12th. And I don't know that he really taught us a lot of content. We sort of learned through his disorganization how to become organized, because he'd just go, he'd put a date on the calendar and say, this is when we've got this big theatrical production. And then he'd sit back and do nothing. And I think it was by design. Part of it was his mechanism for just getting us to go, oh my gosh, this date's coming up and we're going to look foolish if we don't pull it together. So there'd be a stage crew suddenly, and we'd have, you know, he'd obviously tell who different actors were, but we pulled this thing together because we had to. And so part of this whole sort of like life studies that he did for us was he would have us do these lists of things to do. And so he'd say, you got to put your list down. And it was T squared D, things to do. And I still use that as my little list mechanism. And I love a good list. You know, I think that's a really key thing, and love that gamification. I think if you can pull games into it, I totally agree. I think it's motivating. Kids kind of lose themselves in sort of the pursuit and of winning, or whatever, the collegiality that comes of gaming. And it's a great way to kind of lighten things up. So great. I think these are great strategies.
I love that you have this. I mean, look how important that was, that teacher, and that impact on you for creating lists. And that, I mean, you've just said the one thing that I think really parents need to encourage students to do more than ever, which is get involved. It doesn't have to be a team. It could be musical. It could be the drama, because that is built, like, their phones they don't even care about at that point, right? You're creating a production together. You have to collaborate with one another. Those skill sets, like, I know teens are, I think, a lot more kind of getting away from doing those things, because they, again, that piece of like getting afraid to kind of go interact. But we need to be doing more of that now than ever, and kind of telling teens, no, you have, like, I almost think that it should be a grad requirement that you are involved in either a sport or a club or a program, because they're not going to get it otherwise. If we made it a requirement, a forced requirement, which I know that sounds strict, I think we really have to.
Yeah.
They're going to get that piece that you've just talked about in a really natural, organic way.
Yeah. And I think that the really, like, when you see kids come together with a common purpose and goal, it's a beautiful thing. And I think any humans who do that, it just make absolute magic, right? I think about my daughter, you know, she's a real go-getter, kind of natural entrepreneur, and she's 10. So she's just, you know, she is quite interested in her tablet and whatever, like, there's games, she likes Roblox, whatever. And she plays that socially, but we're not into social media per se yet. You know, there's not any of those. I haven't let her do any of that. And she has this vitality when she gets an idea and she wants to do something. Like, just recently, she decided she was going to do pumpkin spice cookies, and we pretty much made it our entire weekend because that's what she wanted to do. And sometimes when she says, I have an idea, I get a big sort of PTSD moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, how much effort and you know, how many hours are we talking here in terms of effort? But it's a beautiful thing too, because we have this collaboration. She has a really, really strong vision. She just needs to close the loop. And she was able to sell those cookies door to door. And she brought her little wagon, this kid. She's like, this is what I'm doing. I'm like, all right, here's your walkie-talkie. I need to know you're safe. And out she went. And I said, I need to know your pitch. And she kind of gave it to me. And she's like, you know what, Mom? I've got this. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, through her natural desire to, I guess, make money and kind of create this product, she's gone
Love
out,
it.
she's knocked on, 20, 25 doors in our neighborhood, introduced herself, all these valuable skills, had a conversation, somehow, however she managed to do it, sold these cookies, comes back with $90 in her pocket. I'm like, okay,
Wow.
right? This is amazing. So I think about these opportunities, if we can sort of set them up and then stand back and let them figure it out as much as possible, it's a huge win.
And I'm just gonna that cookie sounds amazing and I'd love to try that cookie. I feel like sometimes when I hear parents and I feel like, I'm going to say that I felt like you just did it when they talk about their kids maybe being on a tablet or they're doing it now in a way that feels very defensive or like, oh,
Right.
am I putting a screen in my kid's hands?
Yeah.
And a lot of parents are doing that, right? Because they're like, well, is it, screens are going to be there for the kid. Like if you don't, then they're not prepared to be using them either.
This is true.
So I think that parents, there has to be this larger discussion with parents on not that shaming piece of the phone, which yes, are there moments where I look at it, a small child, and I'm like, oh man, that kid should, that screen's going to have some longer ramifications. But that shaming of parents with the screens, because it's a part of society. The kids are watching us use them. I think the modeling of how we use them is the important piece. And the modeling of, yeah, I recognize that I'm on my phone, but as soon as, it's like an hour before bed, I'm not doing that anymore, right? It's just the modeling of how to use these devices, not that we're going to keep kids away from them, because we're not. And I really, it hurts when I see parents who are feeling the shame piece of like allowing their kids to have a tablet, which is really helping them learn on a lot of other ways too. So just that healthy use. Anyways, I
appreciate that, because I think there is sort of this tension that you feel with screen time where you go, yikes, this doesn't seem like the right choice all the time, right? And it obviously you're not doing it all the time, but I think it's tricky and all sorts of trepidation around the social media. But there is so much to dig into, and I just, I'm cognizant of time, and I just want to thank you so much, Lisa Green, for coming on today. If there is one message that you'd like to leave educators or parents with, what would that be?
Oh, gosh, that's a big question. It's that one message right now.
Yeah.
Have understanding and empathy for one another. Try to understand each other with this, and try to understand your own use of this and how it's impacting you. If we can explore ourselves a little bit and how we feel it's impacting us, we'll have better conversations with others around it. But not to have that guilt piece with it, because I constantly feel guilty that I'm on my phone too much, or I'm proud of myself when I've been able to like monitor it away. But I think we all are existing in these dual worlds right now with this going on, and we need to just be more empathetic with one another, which, hopefully goes back to your message always, but isn't that always the message?
Yes, I think that's an important one. And I think understanding that we don't have it all figured out, and we're kind of navigating this alongside our kids, and we haven't been there before, which makes it tricky. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Morgane.
Where can people find you if they're interested in purchasing the book and learning more about you, connecting with you? I'm sure you would be open to people reaching out or having seminars, workshops with you. What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. The book is coming out in January. So we're aiming for the middle of January with Elevate EDU. And that book will be like Amazon, it'll be in most places. And my Instagram is Lisa Green _here to learn. And I have a website as well, which is heretolearn.ca. And that's just the greater Here to Learn. Of course, this is an area that I'm interested in, but there's so many more that I am with education. This just happens to be the thing at the moment that I'm diving deep into.
Great. That's amazing. And that's Trevor McKenzie's company?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Lisa. This has been so much fun.
Morgane, thank you so much. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Kindsight 101 with me, your host, Morgane Michael. It has been an absolute pleasure. I always learn so much, but really, I want to hear what you've learned. Please find me on social media by searching Morgane Michael and reach out. I always love to hear from people.